Good afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friends, as you know, this week we have discussion on population theory. The last lecture we tried to understand the population theory given by Malthus. We tried to understand the growth of population and the different aspects of population through the eye of Malthus. Today we will move further and we will try to understand the population and growth of population and the different dimensions of population through the eye of Marx and Ricardo. And we'll also try to understand the difference between all these three important theorists of the population theories. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in the studio the same resource person, Dr. Abhay Kumar. He is presently working in Institute for Human Development, New Delhi, and he specializes in population theory. He has done PhD from the Center for the Study of Population Study in Jawaharlal Nehru University, one of the premier university of the country. And Dr. Abhay specializes in population and development issues and brought up a number of research papers, research reports, and book on the diverse issues like aging, reproductive and child health, maternal and child health, food security, poverty, and human development, etc. And he also presented a number of papers at national, international seminars. So I think his knowledge and experience will help us to understand the topic population theories. And apart from this, I would like also to say that Dr. Bhai is a very active at different level. He is a visiting faculty in Jamia Millia Islamia University, Institute of Food Security, Central Training Institute of FCI, visiting faculty in V.V. Giri National Level Institute, and also a member of Technical Advisory Committee of Indian Association of Parliamentarians on Population and Development, New Delhi. So he's quite active. He interacts with the people at different level and try to understand the view of population and try to explain through the eye of theories. So I think certainly his knowledge and experience will help us give an insight to understand the population, rising population, and we'll try to find out the solution and try to find out the way out how one can do it. So on your behalf, I welcome him for EduSet lecture. Welcome.
Thank you, Amrendraji. Good afternoon, friends. Yesterday we discussed the population theories of Malthus, and I'll just try to recap what we discussed yesterday before I proceed to discuss the Marxian population theory. Yesterday we discussed about the Malthusian population theory, wherein we studied his postulations, his natural law, and wherein he tried to make the point that there are two natural laws that exist. One is the necessity of the food, and another is the passion between the sexes, and these are the two natural laws which ultimately leads to the population growth. Now he argued his population theory with the number of with the help of number of other theories. As we discussed yesterday, we discussed about the law of diminishing returns, and then we also discussed about how Malthus was what was the thought of Malthus on the capital distribution among the poor, and then we discussed in detail about the several checks that Malthus has proposed to control the population, in which we discussed about the preventive checks and the positive checks, in which I said that Malthus was preferring to have preventive checks than positive checks. And then we also discussed about a lot of criticism that came on the Malthus population growth theory, and we discussed in detail with the number of scholars' opinion on the Malthus growth of theory. At the end, I said that whatsoever criticism Malthus has given, Malthus was credited with the fact that He was one of the first person who has brought the attention of the world scholars on the growth of population and its repercussions. And since then, a number of theories have come, and all of them have first discussed Malthus and then proposed their own theory. Similarly, in that particular context, today I am going to discuss the population theory given by Marx. Friends, as you know, Marx was one of the most influential philosophers in human history. As you can see, his Karl Heinrich Marx, who was born in 1818 and died in 1883. He was just into the next generation of the Malthus. As I said, he is one of the most influential philosophers in the human history. He was a German philosopher, economist, sociologist, historian, journalist, and revolutionary socialist. Marx as such didn't write a theory of population the way Malthus has written an essay on the population, but his ideas on the population growth gets reflected from some of his writings. Marx discussed the law of population basically in his book called Capital, one of the most famous book that Capital. In the volume 1, chapter 25, he wrote a chapter on the general law of capital accumulation. In this particular chapter, Marx discussed about the law of population. In this particular chapter, as I will discuss, Marx reacted very strongly against the Malthusian population theory, because according to Marx rejected Malthus' principle of population by saying that it is another instance of the way in which bourgeois economists reify the social relations. Basically, Marx's criticism on Malthus was that Malthus was favoring capitalism, where, as we all know, that Marx was one of the greatest opponent of the capitalism. So, in his chapter of the law of accumulation, general law of accumulation, Marx said that Malthus is a bourgeois economist who is trying to reify the social relations with the help of his population theory. As we know, as we discussed yesterday, Malthus basically ascribed his widespread poverty, hunger, unemployment, etc. and said that it is an outcome of the natural laws. As we discussed yesterday, it was an outcome of the natural laws. But according to Marx said that it is not because of the natural laws. Rather, it is a natural inevitabilities. These are not natural inevitabilities that was proposed by Malthus, but it is an unpleasant gifts of capitalism. Now, to understand Marx, we will have to understand some of his basic ideas on capitalism, labor issues, and law of accumulation. So, I will discuss in brief some of his ideas on capitalism, what he said about the capitalism, what he said about the labor issues, and what he said about the on different issues of the law of capital accumulation. Basically, Marx gave a scientific interpretation of history. As we all know, he tried to define the history in a very scientific form, and he said that history is nothing but a study in the change in modes of production in the society. Now, he tried to explain that the society is not static, it is progressing, and as we all know that in the beginning of the humankind, we all were nomads. Now later on we get the ideas of hunting, then we started food gathering, then we started sheep rearing, then we started living in a settled house. After that we started domesticating animals. Then after we settled in house, started domesticating animals, then private agriculture developed. Because of the private agriculture, this new social class developed, because when private agriculture developed, what we saw is that the private agriculture needed some of the laborers to cultivate in the farms. So, because of that, labor was required for the first time, and the moment this this stage came in the history of the mankind, the society got divided into two forms. One, the rich class, the other poor class. According to Marx, this urban culture, industrialization and private mode of production gave birth to capitalism. Now, because of this capitalism, the private modes of production, society got divided into two parts. One is rich, the other is poor. Marx said that the rich were those who possesses the means of production, whereas the laborers work on their means of production. Now, the rich were according to the theory of the labor value, which I will also discuss later in Ricardo's theory. The theory of the labor value says that it is only the labor who create value addition through their labor. Work done by the labor only creates value, and the means of production on their own cannot produce anything. So, basically Marx tried to say that though capitalists had the means of production, they used to hire the labor, and it is the labor who used to create value addition to the means of production. Means of production themselves cannot do the value addition on anything. So, he said that when the labor work in the private modes of production, they get some kind of wages for that, and that particular wages are always lesser than their contribution. So, the actual wage that a labor should have got and the theoretical wage that the labor should have got and the actual wage that they are getting, the difference between that wage is called the surplus wage. Now, capitalists used to collect that surplus wage and try to expropriate that added surplus wage to their capital, and that way they are adding more and more to their capital. The owner of modes of production has the freedom to offer employment on their own terms, whereas the laborer has no choice but has to abide by the terms and conditions which their capitalists dictate. Now, Marx said that in a capitalist society, the laborer does not employ means of production. It is the means of production which employs the laborer. Thus, what happens? The workers by contract sell their energy, sell their skill, sell their work, and for that, in return, they get the agreed wages from the capitalist. Now, this has been the situation right since man started employing laborers. The employer earns profit by exploiting the laborers. The division of classes between the capitalist and the laborers started class struggle. Why? Because the mutual interest of laborers and the capitalist were always hostile and irreconcilable. Now, Marx gave a law of capital accumulation. As I discussed, Marx said that the capitalist uses the laborers and try to exploit the laborers in order to get the surplus profit. Now, Marx's answer to the Malthus principle of population is the principle of reserved army of labor. or what he said, that the relative surplus population. Now, as we all know that Malthus population theory said that it is the outcome of the natural law, but according to Marx, he tried to give his theory of population on the basis of the reserved army of labor or surplus population. He said that the accumulation and expansion of capital constitutes the driving force of capitalism. And why it happens? It happens because capitalists can operate with a profit, and this profit originate in the appropriation of the surplus value produced by the labor power with what capitalists buy. Now, capitalists buy the labor power, and it is the labor who works on the means of production. Because of that, capitalists earn profit. Now, since the capitalists are exploiting the laborers, earning more surplus wage than the labor should have got, they try to accumulate all those profits and surplus wage, and they try to accumulate capital. And this is the surplus value what Marx says. Now, this surplus value allows capitalists to expand their business. Now, what they do is that they spend those surplus value, and they again appropriate more surplus value by spending more and more capital into the production system, and this lead to further accumulation and expansion and so on. So, this way Marx tried to say that it is the capitalist who use the labor power, who exploits the labor, and the profit, the surplus value that capitalists earn, they again invest into the modes of production, they again get the surplus value, and that is how they keep on accumulating the profits. Now, this process of accumulation implies also that when they keep investing the surplus value into the production system, they require more and more labor. Now, since the labor is limited, if they want to invest more and more capital into the production system, they will require more labor, and since the labor is limited, the value of the labor goes up. Now, the wage rate of the labor increases. Okay? So, now what happens? Marx says that as an increase in the demand of any commodity produces an increase in the price of that commodity, in this specific case accumulation leads to an increase in the value of labor power above its natural value. So, the value that laborers used to get early, now they are getting more wage because there is a greater demand of labor. Why? Because the capitalists have invested more and more capital into the modes of production. So, as a consequence, there would be reduction or disappearance of surplus value that the capitalists got. Now, since they have to pay more wage to the laborers, the surplus value that the capitalists are getting, now there is a reduction of that surplus value there. Now, what happens when wages are high? Workers overproduce themselves. Why? Because they think that if they have more number of people in their family, since the wages are high, they will be able to have more household income. So, in order to do that, they try to overproduce, and here what Malthus says, that when wages are high, workers overproduce themselves. Now, the consequent population, what happens when they start overproducing? Population start increasing again. Now, that will produce a supply of labor larger than the demand. Now, what happens? We have seen that there was a greater demand of laborers because of the capital accumulation of the capitalist who is investing again in the modes of production, and because of that the wages gets higher, and since the wages gets higher, the workers overproduce themselves, and again when the workers overproduce themselves, the consequent population starts increasing, which brings the case that the labor supply becomes larger than the demand in the modes of in the markets of modes of production. So what happens when the population again increases, then the demand, again the wage rate goes down. So Marx says that the solution to the increase in the natural wage is by controlling their numbers so that they can increase the price of the labor. So Marx also advised that if a laborer wants to increase their natural wage, they should keep a tab on their population rather than overproducing. So this is what Marx tried to say on the population growth. Now, so according to the Marx viewpoint, what we have seen that it is the economic classes, the rich and the poor, and the private modes of production, both of them are the twin evils that lead to poverty, unemployment and fast growth of population. So here is the difference between the Marxian population theory and the Malthusian population theory. As we have discussed yesterday, the Malthus tried to argue that population, the poverty, unemployment and fast growth of unemployment are because of the natural laws, whereas Marx says that it is not because of the natural laws, it is because of the economic classes and private modes of production, and these are the principal twin evils which leads to the poverty, unemployment and fast growth of population. Now, the capital which Marx said, he said that the capital are of two kinds. One, there is a constant capital, and other there is a variable capital. The constant capital is the means of production, which means it is laborers and other means of production, land and other means of production, whereas the variable capital is the value of the labor power. Now, while the constant capital does not undergo any change, the variable capital produces its own value and a surplus. So suppose a capital is putting a constant capital in the system, it is the labor who brings value addition to the capital and produces its own value, that means its own wage, and also a surplus value which as a profit the capital is gained. So according to Marx, constant capital, when it is constant, then constant capital does not increase the surplus value, it is the labor which increases the surplus value. Now what happens when the total capital increases, both the constant capital as well as the variable capital, what happens, its variable part may also increase, the labor part may also increase, and as a result what happens, again the law of diminishing returns which Malthus also discussed, Marx also said that the law of diminishing returns again sets in here. Since the capital is constant and the variable capital, the constant capital is constant and the variable capital increases, so what happens, the law of diminishing returns start setting in. So Marx also said that the technological development and rise in productivity of labor tend to decrease the ratio of variable capital further. So if you are putting a technological input in the means of production, that also again decreases the ratio of variable capital. So according to Marx, the introduction of technology into the production system also lowers the value of the laborers. That means again it brings the poverty, unemployment and other social evils. Now according to Marx, there is as I said earlier, there is a surplus population, or what he called a reserve army of population. Now to the surplus population, Marx said that it is of four kinds. What is surplus population? Surplus population is those population which are more than that is required in the production system. So if a population which is not required in the production system but is ready to be employed in the production system, that is the surplus population. Marx said that there are four kinds of surplus population in the production system. The first one is the stagnant surplus. Now what is this stagnant surplus? A stagnant surplus is, or stagnant surplus population are those workers which have extremely irregular employment. Now, this stagnant surplus has these are the irregular employment. Why it happens? Why this stagnant surplus appear? It appears because as some branches of the industries decay, handicrafts to manufacturing and manufacturing to mechanization takes place, it provides a large reservoir of a stagnant surplus. So, the moment you change the technology into the production system, the moment you close a branch of the production system, you get a stagnant surplus of the population. Now, Marx said stagnant surplus was the second surplus which Marx discussed. The first surplus that he which he discussed is the latent surplus, and the latent surplus basically Marx said that it is associated with the agriculture sector. Now, as the capitalist development of the agriculture proceeds, the private modes of production in the agriculture proceeds, it causes a latent surplus. Why? Because there is a constant movement of pauperized agriculture workers towards the center of industry. So, they keep on moving towards the center of industries, and that is why because as and when you have the latent you have the capital mode of production in the agriculture, there are a lot of latent surplus population in the agriculture system. So, what happens? They become pauper, and because of that they try to move towards the center of industries. So, this is the first surplus which Marx said that it is a latent surplus, and then there was a stagnant surplus which I have already discussed, and then he said there is another surplus which he said about the floating surplus. Now, he said that in modern industries where modern division of labor exists, only a small number of workers continue to find employment in them, and majority of them are regularly discharged. So, in modern industrial setup, constantly there is a discharge of surplus population, and those surplus population is called the floating surplus. Now, this floating surplus is marked with two contradictions. There is always a case in the manufacturing in the modern industrial sector that there is a need of employment in that particular modern industrial sector. At the same time, you will find that there is also an unemployment persisting. So, it is a contradiction where the manufacturing industry says that they are not getting the sufficient hands. At the same time, there are a number of unemployed persons. So, this floating surplus is marked with these particular characteristics. So, Marx said that there are four kinds of surplus. The first is floating surplus, the second is latent surplus, the third is stagnant surplus, and there is another category of surplus labor which is known as paupers. Marx called it pauper or pauperized surplus. Now, what is this paupers? Paupers are the lowest segment of surplus population. They consist of those who are able to work but have become pauper due to economic crisis. Paupers are also those orphans and pauper children who are then they are demoralized and ragged, and then there are those who are unable to work in the modes of production. So, these are the pauperized surplus. Marx said that this category includes those who lack power to adapt due to prevailing division of labor, who have crossed the normal age of work, and they are the victims of the industry, such as mutilated, the sick and the widows. So, according to Marx, there is a surplus population. That surplus population has appeared because of the growth of population, and these surplus population are of four different types as I discussed. The first one was the floating surplus population, which happens mostly in modern industries, and that is marked with the contradiction. The second one was the latent surplus, which is largely found in the agriculture sector. The third is a stagnant surplus, where you get the irregular employment, and then there are pauperized surplus. So, these are the four different surplus which Marx tried to discuss. Now, Marx also said about the reserve army of labor. The surplus population and the reserve army of labor is similar thing. Now, to the reserved army of labor, Marx said that this reserved army of labor is not a constant thing, or it is not a matter of the closed society. Basically, reserved army of labor is, as I already discussed, it is also international in nature. So, according to Marx, Marx said that it is composed of its own ranks of unemployed in the closed society. So, suppose there is a society, it has its own unemployed population. Also, those who immigrate from the other countries, there are people who are waiting in the other countries that if they will get the opportunity to work in another country, they can migrate and they can get the work there. So, there are also people outside the society who is a part of the reserved army of labor. So, Marx also took consideration of the reserved army of labor in the form of the international societies. So, they said, Marx said that the reserved army of labor is basically composed of its own ranks of unemployed, those who migrate from the other countries, and also those who remaining in their own countries occasionally work from foreign corporations. As in today's circumstance, we see the case of BPOs and all, they remain in their own countries, but they work for the other countries. So, those kind of factors also Marx considered in the reserved army of labor. So, according to Marx, the surplus population, as we have discussed, there are 4 types of surplus population, but Marx said that out of the other than the surplus population, the reserved army of labor which is available in a society constitutes not only of their own unemployed, but also unemployed from the other societies, and also those who occasionally work sitting in their own countries for the other countries or the other societies. So, this is the reserved army of labor Marx tried to discuss. Now, since this reserved army of labor is of international character, so Marx basically hitting towards Malthus, where Malthus tried to did not consider the migration impact in their in his theory. So, basically Marx tried to say that any policy recommendations which will see population control a solution based upon the analysis of this problem focused upon the closed society. So, if you are discussing about the Malthus basically discussed about the closed society. So, according to Marx, if you are seeing it, if you are giving a policy recommendations based on the closed society, that means you are not tackling the problem, you are not providing the solution properly. So, according to him, these kind of policies are unrealistic. So, basically he was criticizing Malthus, and he was saying that the policies of containing the population in their own society, or not considering the population which is waiting to be part of the surplus labor from the other societies, we will not be able to provide the realistic policies to the society. So, in the long run, what happens? These kind of policies will fail. So, what was the solution from the Marx? As we all know, Marx presented his own socialism form of production, and he tried to argue that socialism forms of production can only give or contain the growth of population and bring the happiness in the life of the population. So, to sum it up, as we can see that Marx finded an inverse relationship between the level of wages and birth rates, death rates, and the size of family. That means that if the wage rate increases, then what happens? The birth rates, death rates, and size of family, in the beginning it declines, and after that, as a consequence to the increasing wage rate, it again starts increasing. Now, so basically what Marx did is, Marx tried to establish a relationship between capital accumulation, labor demand, surplus population, wage levels, standard of living, poverty, rates of fertility, mortality, and population growth. So, Marx's theory of population was basically based on these factors known as capital accumulation, labor demand, surplus population, and wage levels. So, this is what Marx tried to say on the population. But Marx was, as we will see, that whatever Marx said in relation to what Malthus said, Marx was also criticized, because as we all know that Marx's theory of socialism has also been criticized much, and all those who criticizes the theory of socialism or communism what Marx propagated, they all disagree with the Marxian population theory. Now, basically Marx's critiques are, Marx said that unprecedented growth of population are because of the reserve supply of labor, but it is not because of that, it is basically because of the betterment of healthcare facilities. So, basically the growth of population that took place, it was not because of the what Marx said, that it is because of the capitalist setup of the rich and the poor and the modes of production and the labor relationship, but because of the improving health care system, and it is because of the improving health care system that the mortality declined and the birth rate remained constant, and then the growth of population took place. So, this increase in population does not directly lead to decline in wage also. So, in many of the cases we have also seen that when population increases, it does not lead to the decline in the wage rates, as Marx and also Malthus have said. So, Marx was also criticized that, you see, the wage rate does not always decline with the increase in the population, and there are other socio-political and other factors which lead to the decline in the wage rates. So, there was another criticism also called factors of religious faith and cultural norms which are responsible for the high growth rate. So, Marx was also criticized that he did not consider the social norms, he did not consider the educational value of the labor, he did not consider the technological advancement and attitude towards the family. All these things were not considered in the Marxian population theory. So, these are the determinants which was largely ignored by Marx, and as we all know that in population growth, the educational level, the technological advancement, social norms, all these takes, and also attitude towards family, all this brings a lot of difference, but Marx did not consider any of these determinants. Now, Dumont, a famous scholar, said that the need for smaller families would be generated by the desire for better economic status. So, the family basically, when they desire for the better economic status, automatically they go for a smaller family setup. So, Marx did not consider all these things. So, this is what are the criticism that came on the Marx, and I will stop here with the Marxian population of theory. Now, since the time is permitting me, I will try to quickly run through what Ricardo has said on the population theory, and then after, if time permits, then we will get some questions from you. Now, let us come to the Ricardian population theory. Friends, we have seen Malthusian population theory, we have also seen Marxian population, studied Marxian population of theory. Now, I will discuss in brief about the David Ricardo. Now, as you know, David Ricardo was one of the greatest British political economists and one of the most classical economists. And now, this David Ricardo was born in 1772 and died in 1823. So, he was a contemporary of Malthus, as I discussed yesterday also, and he was also an English like Malthus, and he was often credited with systematizing the economies. So, both Malthus and Ricardo were English political economists, whereas Marx was a German philosopher. Ricardo influenced the entire economic setup not only of England but of the entire world. There are certain principles of the Ricardo which helped the entire world, which I will discuss in next few slides. He was one of the most influential of the classical economists, along with Thomas Malthus, Adam Smith, and John Stuart Mill. These were one of the foremost classical economists. Now, to give you a basic background of who was Ricardo, Ricardo was a son of a Jewish immigrant stockbroker. He worked for his father at London Stock Exchange, and he had a very checkered career. He started working in the stock exchange, and in 1793 he started his own business of a stockbroker. And after working in the stock market, in 1819 he became a member of Parliament of England. He was a professional economist for 14 years, and because of his work in the stock market, he amassed a lot of wealth because of his knowledge and his acumen. So, this Ricardo read Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, the famous book The Wealth of Nations of the Adam Smith, Ricardo read, and he was very much influenced by Adam Smith's work on the wealth of nations. After that, he started thinking on the economic theories, and he wrote his first economic pamphlet in 1810, and the pamphlet name was The High Price of Bullion, a proof of depreciation of banknotes. Later on, his most famous work, what was known as On the Principle of Political Economy and Taxation, which was published in 1817, got published. Malthus and Ricardo were, as I said, both were contemporary and a good friend also. They used to share their thoughts on population growth and economy. Ricardo largely accepted Malthus' belief on population growth. He said that population keeps expanding, and eventually there won't be enough food to go around and economic growth will stop. So in that form, you see Malthus and Ricardo and even Marx, all the three were very much pessimistic about the growth of the population. They never considered that the growth of population can also bring the economic development. They always said that there will come a time when this population growth will stop the economic growth of a nation. So this was one of the point of agreement between all the three, Malthus, Marx and Ricardo. As I said, Ricardo was also known for his gloomy outlook upon the results of growing population. He said that the population rose, the more land would be required to be cultivated. Now, according to Ricardo, he brought a new aspect into it. He said that whenever you need, more production, when the population will grow, more food will be required. When more food will be required, you will need to have more land. So what you will do is that you will start using the barren land which is not cultivated till yet. Now what happens, if you use the barren land, it will require more labor power. So more labor power will again more labor power will require more capital also, more labor power also, and if a barren land is producing agriculture produce, and since it is cultivated with more labor power, the output of that barren land in the form of agriculture produce will be costlier, and since this will be costlier, the actual wage will decline. The actual wage of the population will decline. So this is what Malthus tried to argue. Now he said that since the agriculture produce will get costlier, the real wage of the population will decline, and then the people will be getting less and less sustenance. So this was of course under the assumption that in capitalist society, the employees of these workers would pay the least amount that they had to do. Now, how does this Ricardo's theory work? Basically, he said that something changes profit expectations in the modes of production, and what is it? Maybe it is the technology which changes the modes of production or the profit expectations. So what he said that when the technology which increases the profits motto of the capitalist, because of that output grows. And since the output grows, the demand of the labor increases, and since the demand of the labor increases, again the wage rate goes up. So here again the Ricardo was on the wage rate theory, Ricardo was on the similar line on which Malthus was there. So Marx was there. So Marx also said that when wage increases, the population grows. Ricardo also agreed with this principle that wage rate rises, then population grows. So it was an agreement again, an agreement point between the Malthus, Ricardo and Marx, that wage rate leads to an increase in the population. Now, as the population will grow, there will be more demand for food, and as the food will be needed more, the food prices will go up, and then to reduce that food produce, again less productive land will be utilized, and then eventually the profit will fall. So, wages will go at subsistence level. Now, he said that this is a stationary state. Now, Ricardo, according to the Ricardo theory, what drives the system? Basically, it is the capital accumulation which drives the system. So, in that particular case, the Ricardo's idea was also similar to the Marx. We must remember that Ricardo came before Marx. So, the idea of Ricardo was similar to the Marx. Now, who gains? The landlord gains because they are the capitalists. Why they gain? Because they try to bring more and more less fertile land into the cultivation. They increase the production cost, and that increases the wheat price, and then again they increase their profit. So, Ricardo also discussed about the theory of the labor value. What is this theory of the labor value? Basically, theory of the labor value says that the price changes in the wage rate is basically a demand supply gap, but this demand supply gap is only for the short run increase in the wage rate. The long run increase in the wage rate or the long run change in the wage rate is because of the labor cost. So, the demand supply gap of the labor is short run price changes, whereas the long run price changes is because of the changes due to labor costs. And now, as we have discussed earlier also, it is only workers who create value addition to the through their labor to the means of production. Means of production cannot add value on their own. So, it is the workers who create the value addition to the means of production. There are several other laws which Ricardo discussed. There is a corn law, there is an iron law of wages. Iron law of wages again says that the real wage is determined by the market, which is as wages increases, the population increases, and again since population increases, then again wages goes to their subsistence level. So, this process continues, and this process when the population increases, that also increases the demand in the food. That demand in the food results into the demand in the food price. So, all these causations are discussed in the iron law of wages. Ricardo's famous theory was a law of comparative advantage. Now, this law of comparative advantage was one of the most innovative theory given by Ricardo at that point of time, and as we know that the theory of comparative advantage of Ricardo was the basic theory or the basic fundamentals behind the international trade that has started. So, it was because of the Ricardo, why? Because of the Ricardo's law of comparative advantage that the international trade began. What is the law of comparative advantage? Law of comparative advantage says that each nation has a capacity to produce something. They have a better capacity to produce something better, but each nation does not have capacity to produce everything. So, what happens? Ricardo's point of argument was that every nation should give emphasis on their strength and should produce what they can produce best, and though the nation which is not able to produce the other means of subsistence, they need to buy it or purchase it from the other nations. So, this is what was the law of comparative advantage which Ricardo tried to say, and he says that it says basically each nation produces the goods that they can make most efficiently, and also all nations will benefit in the end by trading for the goods produced by the other nations. So, by efficiently he meant that the nations have required natural resources, the right level of technology, and the enough skilled laborers. So, that way Ricardo's law of comparative advantage emphasized on the international trade. Now, Ricardo's effect on the wage is also, Ricardo was also one of the greatest proponent of the technological introduction in the system, but he said that technological introduction in the system leads to the what you call when he said that when wages are high, the capitalists tend to avoid the wages are high because of the labor. So what capitalists try to do is, capitalists try to, in order to reduce the labor wages, they try to introduce the technology into the production system, and because of that production system sheds a lots of surplus population, and that surplus population, because of that surplus population, unemployment, misery and all takes place. So this is what Ricardo's thought on the what you call technological introduction in the production system. As I discussed yesterday in the Malthus, as we said about the theory of distribution, I discussed this yesterday in the Malthusian perspective, and Ricardo was exactly agreeing with Malthus on the theory of distribution, and Ricardo was also adverse towards the distribution of capital to the poor by the rich or by the government. So Ricardo did not favor this distribution of capital to the poor. Instead, they wanted that the capital should be invested in the economic growth, and if it is invested, it has certain other repercussions, as I discussed yesterday, which means that it will also, the population will grow because the means of subsistence will increase, and also the need for the food and other means of subsistence will increase, which will further raise the prices of all those commodities. So there is another theory this is what what was there in the Ricardo's theory, and there is a famous scholar called J.B. Say, and he has given his law wherein he said that supply creates its own demand. This particular fact, that supply creates its own demand, was not taken into consideration by any of the three classical economists, say Malthus, Marx or Ricardo. So basically the growth of the population can also activate the demand, was not foreseen by the three scholars. So this was basically an argument against the Malthus. Now here I have tried to put the two famous scholars, Ricardo and Malthus, together to see what were the differences between the two approaches. As you can see that basically Ricardo was brought their theory on the basis of the abstraction in the economic science, whereas Malthus brought his theory on the basis of his intuitive approach. Secondly, David Ricardo opposed Corn Law. Corn Law I didn't discuss because of the paucity of time, but basically Corn Law was a law of the England which favored the local producer in the England, that restricted the import of the corn from the other countries. So basically, since Ricardo was the proponent of the international trade theory and he gave his law of comparative advantage, that is why he was favoring the he was opposing the Corn Law, whereas Malthus was favoring the Corn Law. So this was the basic disagreement between the Ricardo and Malthus. Basically the major contribution of Ricardo was differential rent, labor theory of value, theory of distribution and comparative advantage, whereas major contribution of Malthus theory was the law of population. Whereas if you see the Marx, we have seen that basically his argument was that we should see the population growth in the scientific interpretation of the history, in the labor, in the social setup of the society, in the view of the capitalist setup of the society, and this is what Malthus, Marx and Ricardo has to say on the population growth theory. So here I am trying to close the lecture, and I have tried to cover the classical theory on the population, and tomorrow I will try to discuss the neoclassical theory of population growth. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so as you said that so that we can have some kind of background while discussing classical theory and neoclassical. What is the main difference? Can you say this?
Basically, I'll discuss it in detail tomorrow, but to just give you a brief introduction, the term is called neo-Malthusian theory. Now this term itself explains that there was again a greater emphasis on the Malthusian argument of the population growth in this particular neo-Malthusian theory. There were lots of scholars who Malthus and all these classical economists gave his theory in the 19th century. But in 20th century also, there were lots of scholars who brought the Malthusian argument, and they said that the population is increasing in such a manner that there will come a time that the resources will be depleted and the misery and vices will come. So there was a greater emphasis on the Malthusian argument on the population growth, and that is what neo-Malthusian tried to argue.
Okay, so these are the main
Yes.
departing points, you can
Yes.
say.
Yes.
And as you say that the classical theory, in present situation when we apply the classical theory, how do we explain? Is this gel with the prediction made by them, or we find some kind of deviation?
Okay. Basically, these classical economists, we have to understand the circumstances, we have to understand the situation when these economists gave their theory. This theory came up in 17th and 18th century. So, this 18th and 19th century, and at that particular point of time, there was this industrial revolution has started taking place. A new social relations was started taking place, but all these theories did not consider the real cause of the population growth, the demographic parameters of the population growth, and that is why they tried to see it in the terms of the population resource adjustment.
Okay.
So that was the major departing point.
Okay. So, well friends, with these words we like to conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on your behalf I thank Dr. Abhay Kumar for giving such a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.